Tessa Moreau had arms that could carry 6 plates at once and a smile that never quite reached her eyes anymore. She was 26, 260 pounds, and exhausted in the way that doesn't show up on any doctor's chart. The kind that settles into your joints at 3 in the morning when you're still scrubbing down tables because the closing crew called out sick again. She worked the day shift at Hartwell's, a mid-range hotel restaurant in downtown Chicago, where the lighting was always slightly too yellow and the carpet had a persistent smell of old gravy that no amount of industrial cleaner could fully kill. Tessa had been there 4 years, long enough to know which regulars tipped in coins, which ones tipped in compliments, and which ones didn't tip at all, but left a smear of lipstick on the rim of their coffee cups like a parting insult. She knew the menu by heart in 3 languages because Mr. Hartwell had once dreamed of going international before the pandemic crushed that fantasy into powder. She knew which tables wobbled and which ones caught the draft from the kitchen doors. She knew everything about the place except how to make it matter to her anymore. Her lower back started talking to her around 11 most mornings. By 2 o'clock it was yelling. By the end of a double shift, which she worked every Thursday and Friday because rent didn't care about her spine, it had given up speaking in words and moved on to something more like static, white noise. A persistent reminder that her body was keeping careful score of everything she asked it to do. She lived 40 minutes away by bus in a 1-bedroom apartment she shared with her younger sister, Petra, who was finishing her last year of nursing school and studying at the kitchen table most nights when Tessa dragged herself home. They split everything down the middle: groceries, utilities, the cable they kept meaning to cancel. Tessa also carried a quiet private debt that Petra didn't fully know about. $17,000 to a collections agency that had inherited a hospital bill from when Tessa had appendix surgery 3 years ago with no insurance. She paid $200 a month toward it. At that rate, she'd be done in 7 more years, assuming nothing else went wrong with her body, which, given the hours she kept, was a generous assumption. She didn't think of herself as someone waiting to be saved. She wasn't that kind of woman. She thought of herself as someone managing, which was different. Managing implied a plan, even if the plan was small and slow and looked, from certain angles, almost exactly like treading water. The Thursday in late October that everything changed started like every other Thursday, which is to say it started badly. The morning delivery came in short. They were missing 2 cases of sparkling water and a full order of the seasonal squash soup that was the special. And the sous chef, a tightly wound man named Derek, who communicated primarily through sighs, had spent the first hour breathing loudly near Tessa's section. Table 4 sent back their eggs twice. A kid at table 9 knocked over an entire glass of orange juice, which Tessa caught with her left hand about 2 inches from the carpet, which she did not consider heroic, but which earned her a slow clap from a man at the bar who was on his 3rd Bloody Mary before noon. By 12:30, the restaurant had filled up with the usual Thursday crowd. Business lunches, a few hotel guests still in that dazed state of people who aren't quite sure what city they're in, a birthday party of women in their 60s who were each individually delightful and collectively required Tessa's full attention for 45 minutes. She was good at her job. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that being good at her job felt increasingly like pouring water into a cup with a hole in the bottom. Effective, temporary, ultimately pointless. She was refilling the birthday table's water when the front doors opened. She noticed the cold air first. Chicago in October comes in hard, and whoever had just walked through the door brought a slice of it with them. Then she noticed the quiet, not a dramatic hush, not the kind of silence that movies manufacture when someone important enters a room. Just a slight drop in the ambient noise level, a half-second where conversations faltered and then resumed, the way people recalibrate when something in their peripheral vision demands a second look without quite announcing why. 3 men. The one in front was the reason for the recalibration. He was somewhere in his early 40s, tall, with the kind of build that suggested he'd been athletic once, and had never entirely stopped. Dark suit, no tie, the top button of his shirt open in a way that read less like casual and more like he'd made a decision. His hair was dark and going silver at the temples, cut close on the sides. His face was the kind of face that had probably been merely handsome 10 years ago and had since become something more interesting, harder, more settled, the kind of face that had made a few irreversible decisions and learned to live with them. His name was Cord Abretti. Tessa didn't know that yet. What she knew was that the hostess, Janelle, was doing her brightest smile and leading them to table 12, which was the corner booth, the good one, the one with the slightly better lighting and the bench seats that didn't squeak. She finished with the birthday table, pocketed her pad, and went to take their order. The 2 men flanking Cord Abretti were quiet in the specific way of men who are paid to be quiet. They sat on the outside of the booth, which meant Cord was in the center, which meant Tessa had to lean slightly to get his attention, which she did by standing directly across from him and waiting, because she'd learned a long time ago that hovering was less effective than stillness. He looked up from the menu. His eyes were a dark, unreadable brown, and they moved over her the way she'd seen some people look at a piece of art, not appreciatively, but assessingly, like they were trying to figure out what they were actually looking at before deciding what to think about it. "What's good here?" he said. "Depends on what you like," Tessa said. "If you want something that tastes like it was cooked by someone who cares, the pan-seared salmon. If you want something that'll actually fill you up, the short rib. The squash soup is off today, which is probably for the best, because Derek's been in a mood since 9 a.m. and moody soup is never worth it." One of the flanking men blinked. Cord Abretti's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did, a minor shift, like a door opening an inch. "Derek," he said, "the sous chef. He takes the missing deliveries personally. And do you take things personally. Only the things worth it," she said. "Can I get you something to drink while you decide?" He ordered water. The 2 men ordered the same. She went to get it. At the service station, her co-worker Bree, who was refilling a condiment tray and had an almost supernatural gift for noticing things she wasn't supposed to, leaned over and said quietly, "Table 12. You know who that is?" "A man who ordered water," Tessa said. "That's Cord Abretti." The name landed differently when someone said it out loud. Tessa had heard it before. Chicago wasn't a city where you could work service industry for 4 years and not hear certain names spoken in certain tones. Abretti was old money crossed with the kind of business interests that didn't always show up in annual reports. There were things said about him at the level of rumor, the kind of things that people passed along in lowered voices and then immediately acted like they hadn't. "Good tipper?" Tessa asked. Bree stared at her. "I don't actually know." "Then let me find out," Tessa said, and picked up the water glasses. She took their orders, salmon for Cord, the burgers for the 2 quiet men, and the lunch service proceeded the way lunch services do, in overlapping waves of need and resolution. She checked back twice, offered dessert menus once, kept the water glasses full without being asked. She was professional. She was always professional. It was the one thing she'd decided early on she wasn't willing to let the job take from her. She was clearing table 7 when she heard the voice behind her. "Excuse me." She turned. Cord Abretti was standing, which surprised her. She'd assumed he was the kind of man who waited for things to come to him. He was closer than she expected, which meant she had to tilt her head back slightly to look at him, which she did without adjusting her posture. "Your check's at the front," she said, misreading the approach. "I know," he said. "That's not what I wanted." She waited. "You said only things worth it," he said. "What would be worth it for you? If you could have one thing right now, what would it be?" It was such an unexpected question that for a moment she just looked at him. People didn't ask her things like that. People asked her for extra napkins and whether the soup was gluten-free, and if the kitchen could do something not on the menu, because they had a very specific dietary profile. "A day where my back doesn't hurt," she said. It came out before she'd fully thought about it, honest and slightly embarrassing in the way that honest things often are. She almost followed it up with something deflecting, something lighter, but she didn't. He looked at her for a moment. "That's it?" "It would be a very good day," she said. He nodded once, like he was filing something away. Then he said thank you, which was not a thing that happened often enough, and walked toward the front. She watched him go without meaning to. The next morning, a Friday, she came in for her shift to find a small envelope at the host stand with her name on it. Inside was a card, cream-colored, with a phone number and 4 words in clean, sparse handwriting. For a better day, tucked behind it was something else. A black credit card with no name on it, and no visible account number on the front. Heavy, she turned it over. The back was equally blank. She pressed her thumb against it and felt the slight texture of what she eventually learned, after Bree Googled it with an urgency usually reserved for emergencies, was solid titanium. "That's an Abretti card," Bree said, staring at her phone screen. "That's like Tessa. That pays for things. Most cards pay for things. No limit, no limit. He just gave you a no-limit card." Tessa held it for a long moment. She thought about the $17,000. She thought about Petra's textbooks. She thought about the heating unit in their apartment that had been making a noise since September that neither of them could afford to address. She put the card carefully into her apron pocket. She did not immediately call the number. She worked her shift. She went home. She sat at the kitchen table with the card in front of her, while Petra made instant noodles at the stove, and she thought about what it meant to accept something from someone when you had no idea what they expected back. She called the number at 9:15 p.m. He picked up on the second ring. "I don't take gifts from strangers," she said without preamble. "Then don't think of it as a gift," he said. His voice on the phone was the same as in person. Measured, direct, no wasted syllables. "Think of it as a resource. That's a very interesting distinction. You work a job that breaks your back for wages that don't justify it," he said. "That card doesn't change what you are. It changes what you can access. You can keep it or return it. I'd prefer you keep it, but I'm not going to pressure you." "Why?" A pause. "Because you answered an honest question honestly. That's rarer than you'd think." She looked at the card on the table. The light caught the edge of it and made it gleam slightly, like a very expensive, very quiet promise. "I don't know you," she said. "You could," he said, "if you wanted to." She didn't answer that right away. She let the silence breathe, the way she'd learned to let silences breathe, when she wasn't sure what was true yet. "I'll keep the card," she said finally. "I'm not ready to use it, but I'll keep it." "That's enough," he said. She hung up. Petra looked at her from the stove. "Who was that?" "Someone I met at work. Good someone or weird someone." Tessa picked up the card and tucked it into her wallet. "I'll let you know," she said. She didn't use the card for 11 days. Then the heater broke completely, not just complained, but stopped. At 11 on a Wednesday night in early November, when the outside temperature had dropped to 19 degrees. The landlord's voicemail was full. Tessa sat on the couch in her coat and looked at Petra, who was sitting across from her in 2 sweaters and a scarf, and they looked at each other for a moment, with the specific expression of 2 people who have been managing very well up until now. Tessa got her wallet out. The next morning, a man in a grey company van showed up at 8 a.m. with replacement parts and didn't charge them. When Tessa called the number that night to say thank you, Cord said, "The card also works at restaurants that aren't Hartwell's, if you were wondering." "I wasn't," she said, but noted. "How's your back today?" The question caught her off guard. "Better," she said. It was actually a better day. There was something in the silence that followed that she didn't entirely know what to do with. The dinner happened 3 weeks later, which she knew was fast and also felt, from the inside, like it had taken a very long time. He chose the restaurant, not Hartwell's, somewhere quieter and more expensive, with lighting that was actually flattering and a menu with no prices on it, which she found either charming or alarming and hadn't fully decided which. She wore the dress she'd bought at a consignment shop 2 years ago and never found a reason to put on. It fit differently than it used to, not in the way that made her feel bad, but in the way that a woman's body at 26 fits differently than it did at 23, softer in some places, more certain of itself in others. He was already there when she arrived. He stood when she approached the table, which was old-fashioned and oddly nice. He was wearing a jacket and no tie again, the same open collar, which she was starting to think was less a choice and more a signature. "You came," he said. "I said I would. People say things. I don't," she said, and sat down. The dinner was good, the food, but also the conversation, which surprised her. She'd expected the kind of dinner where a man with money mostly talks about himself, pausing occasionally to ask questions that are actually just setups for more talking about himself. Cord wasn't like that. He asked things and then actually listened to the answers, which was disorienting. He asked about Petra. He asked about the appendix surgery with a directness that should have felt intrusive, but somehow didn't. He asked how she'd ended up in Chicago, which required a longer answer, because the answer involved her mother's death when Tessa was 19, and the particular geography of grief that had followed, moving toward something unfamiliar as a way of surviving something unendurable. She hadn't planned to say that much, but it came out, and he received it without flinching, and without that particular performance of sympathy that people put on when they don't know what else to do. He just said, "That's a lot to carry at 19. It's a lot to carry at any age," she said. "Yes," he said, "it is." She looked at him across the table and thought, this man has carried things too. She didn't know what exactly. She didn't know the full shape of the world he moved in, though she had a rough outline of it from what she'd heard and what she could infer. She knew it wasn't clean. She knew there were parts of his life that existed in the spaces between official records and polite conversation. And she knew, sitting there with the good lighting and the menu without prices, that she was not naive about what it might mean to be in proximity to a man like that. She'd been thinking about it since the envelope. Probably since the moment she'd turned to find him standing closer than expected in the middle of a lunch service. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes, the men who are always with you. Are they there because people want to hurt you, or because people are afraid you might hurt them?" He was quiet for a moment, then, "Both," he said, "depending on the day." She nodded. She'd already known the answer was going to be something like that, and she respected that he didn't try to soften it. "I'm not going to pretend I don't know what you are," she said. "I'd rather not pretend things." "I know," he said. "That's why you're sitting across from me and not someone else." She was walking to the parking garage at 11:30 when she felt it. The particular quality of footsteps behind her that were moving at exactly her pace without trying to pass. She turned. 2 men she didn't recognize. Not Cord's men. Wrong posture, wrong shoes, wrong energy entirely. These were men with purposes that didn't include protecting anything. "Cord Abretti's girl," the taller one said. "Not a question. I'm nobody's girl," she said. "You're going to want to come with us." "I'm really not," she said, with a steadiness that surprised even her. Not because she wasn't afraid. She was. Her heart was doing something rapid and unpleasant against her ribcage, but because she'd grown up in circumstances that had taught her early that showing fear was more dangerous than managing it. Her phone was already in her hand. She'd had it out since she'd heard the footsteps. She typed a single word to the last number she'd called. The word was parking, and hit send before the taller man's hand closed around her wrist. What happened next happened fast, and then all at once. 3 minutes, maybe 4. She counted them afterward, in the back of the car that wasn't the men's car, that had arrived so quickly she hadn't fully processed it. Cord was already there. She didn't know how. She'd learn, later, that she'd been followed since she'd left the restaurant, not by him, by his people. As a precaution, he'd arranged without telling her about it, and was now reconsidering whether he should have mentioned. He looked at her wrist, where there was going to be a bruise. "Are you hurt?" he said. "Not seriously," she said. "I'm going to need more information than that." "I'm fine," she said. "I'm annoyed. There's a difference." She paused. "Who were they?" "Competition," he said. "People who thought sending a message through you was a sensible idea. I need you to disabuse them of that notion," she said. Something moved through his face then. Not quite a smile, but the ancestor of one. "Already in progress," he said. She looked out the window at the Chicago streets moving past, the November dark thick and glittering, with wet pavement and headlights. Her wrist ached, her heart was still moving slightly too fast. But underneath those things, surprisingly, was something steady. Not calm, exactly, but something she associated with calm. The knowledge that she'd handled it, that she'd thought clearly, that she hadn't frozen. "For the record," she said, "I understand why you didn't tell me about the security detail. I don't agree with it, but I understand it." "What don't you agree with?" "The not telling. I'm not a person who needs to be managed. I'm a person you can give information to and trust to make decisions with it." He was quiet for a moment. "You're right," he said. "That was my mistake." She looked at him. In her experience, which was not inconsiderable, men who had as much power as Cordobretti had were not usually in the habit of saying, "That was my mistake," and meaning it. She added it to the small list of things about him that she was finding, against her better instincts, genuinely impressive. "Okay," she said. "Then we're good." He drove her home. He didn't ask to come up. He waited until she was inside in the lobby, and then, she saw this through the glass doors, sat there for another moment before the car pulled away. Like he was making sure the door was actually closed behind her. Like it mattered to him that she was actually safe before he moved on. She stood in the lobby of her building and thought about that for a long time. Petra was awake, because Petra was always awake, cross-legged on the couch with her nursing textbooks and a cup of tea that had gone cold. "How was dinner?" "Eventful," Tessa said. Petra looked at her wrist. "I'm fine. It's fine." "Nothing's broken, I would know." "Who?" "People who made a mistake," Tessa said, "which has been corrected." Petra stared at her. "You're being very calm about this. I was also very calm when it was happening. I think it's just how I'm built." "Or," Petra said slowly, "it's how you've had to learn to be, which isn't the same thing." Tessa sat down on the couch next to her. She thought about that for a moment. The distinction between natural and learned, between who you are and whose circumstances have made you. She thought about 19 years old and the geography of grief, and how she'd ended up in a city that wasn't hers, because sometimes moving forward and moving away look identical from this outside. "He said I was my own mistake," she said, which wasn't quite right. She'd said it to him. She untangled the pronouns. "I told him I wasn't a person who needed to be managed, that I could handle information. And he said I was right, that it was his mistake." Petra considered this. A man who says that and means it. "I think he meant it." "Do you like him?" Tessa looked at the ceiling. "I'm trying to figure out if I trust my own judgment enough to answer that." "That's a yes," Petra said. "If it were a no, you'd just say no." Tessa didn't argue with that. She saw him 3 more times over the next 2 weeks. Always dinner. Always somewhere quiet. Always with the slightly strange quality of 2 people who are learning the shape of each other's thoughts without quite naming what they're doing or why. She found out he was 41. She found out he'd grown up in this city, in the neighborhoods to the south. The ones that were now being redeveloped into things that priced out the people who'd actually built them. She found out he had a particular contempt for people who inherited power without earning it, and a complicated relationship with the fact that he'd built his own power through means that were not, as he put it, straightforwardly legitimate. "Does it bother you?" she asked. They were walking. She'd suggested it instead of another restaurant, and he'd agreed without hesitation, which she noted. "The not straightforward parts of it," he said. "The parts that hurt people who didn't choose to be involved." "Like me," she said. "Yes," he said, "like you, which I'm aware of." She pulled her coat tighter. The December air had a different quality than November's. Drier, sharper, with a clean edge to it that Chicago got in early winter before the heavy snow moved in and softened everything. "I'm not afraid of complicated," she said. "I've been managing complicated for years. I'm afraid of being lied to, of being managed, of being someone's beautiful problem that they feel guilty about." "You're not beautiful," he said. She stopped walking. He stopped too, and turned to face her. "That came out wrong," he said. "I'd love for you to fix it," she said. "You're not just beautiful," he said. "You're," the word I used earlier, "complicated, interesting, the kind of person who sends a single word in a crisis, and it's exactly the right word. The kind of person who asks me whether people fear me or hate me, and then doesn't flinch at the answer." He paused. "Beautiful is in there too. But it's not the leading thing." She looked at him for a moment. The streetlight was catching the silver in his hair, the specific, tired intelligence in his face that she'd been cataloging without meaning to for weeks. "Okay," she said. "That's better." "Good," he said, and resumed walking. She fell into step beside him. The conversation that mattered happened on a Sunday afternoon in December, in her apartment, because she'd finally decided to invite him, which had required several days of considering what it meant, and then deciding that overthinking it was its own kind of answer. He sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee. She didn't have anything more impressive to offer, and he hadn't asked for anything more impressive. And she sat across from him, and they talked for 2 hours about everything and nothing, about the city, and about Petra's upcoming graduation, and about a book she'd been reading, and a theory he had about what Chicago would look like in 20 years. Then he set down his coffee and said, "I want you to know something." She waited. "I'm not going to pretend that my life is clean or that being near me doesn't carry risk. You already know that. What I want you to know is that I don't want to manage you. I don't want to make decisions for you or keep you at a comfortable distance. I want to." He paused, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw something in his expression that was less than entirely certain, and she found that she liked him for it more than for anything else. "I want to build something with you. I don't know the shape of it yet, but I want it to be real, whatever that requires." The apartment was quiet. The heating system Cord's men had fixed 2 months ago was running steadily. No noise, no drama, just warmth moving through the rooms the way it was supposed to. Tessa thought about $17,000 and a collection agency and appendix surgery with no insurance. She thought about 6 plates at once, and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She thought about 19 years old and moving toward an unfamiliar city, because it was the only direction that felt like surviving. She thought about a man who'd asked her what she wanted, and then listened to the answer like it was the most important information he'd received all day. "Real is harder than it sounds," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm not easy to be around when things are difficult. I get quiet. I work through things alone before I can bring anyone else in. Petra will tell you that's an understatement. I can work with that," he said. "You'd have to actually work with it, not just say you can." "Yes," he said. "I know the difference." She looked him across the table. The coffee was getting cold. The light through the kitchen window was the gray-white of December in Chicago, flat and honest and not trying to be anything more than what it was. "I work Thursday and Friday doubles," she said. I'm not giving those up until I pay off the debt, and I'm not going to let you pay the debt because I need to do that myself. Those are the terms." He nodded. "Understood, and I want to meet your people. The men around you. I don't want to be kept separate from the parts of your life that are real. That can be arranged. And if something happens, if there's danger, like the parking garage, you tell me. You treat me like someone who can handle information. I already told you that was my mistake," he said. "I don't usually make the same one twice." She folded her hands on the table and looked at him steadily. "Then we can figure out the shape of it," she said, "whatever it turns out to be." He didn't smile, not quite. But his face did something that she'd learned, over the past weeks, was the thing he did instead of smiling, the thing that meant the same thing, a kind of settling, a quiet certainty, arriving in his expression like a light coming on in a room that had been dark for a while. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. Outside, the December cold pressed against the windows, and inside the heat ran steadily, and Tessa Moreau sat at her own kitchen table in her own apartment, in her own life, and thought that this, not the card, not the restaurant with no prices, not the men in the parking garage or the bruise that had faded from her wrist. This, right here, this ordinary Sunday afternoon with bad coffee and good light, and a man who was learning how to say the truth, was the thing she hadn't known she was waiting for. Not rescue, just someone who understood the difference between managing a person and being with one. That, she thought, was a very good day.